I want to tell you guys a quick pre-Christmas story for you as to what my logic was about doing this review. A couple weeks ago, my father was in bad need of some very specific tasks done on the computer, something that could not simply be done with an iPhone or an iPad. And we hadn't needed to use our Windows PC for probably around a month or two up until that point, which meant it had been off all of that time. And I informed him that due to that reason, we would probably not be able to do the task he needed done for at least half the day. We would have to wait at least half the day before we could actually do the task. He asked me, well, why? Why am I going to have to wait 6 to 12 hours or so to do this task? And I said, because it's a Windows PC, and likely Microsoft has released updates since the last time we turned it on, and probably some serious updates. And a computer, which is the one that we're using, could take as many as 2 to 6 hours installing 2 months worth of Windows updates. And I do not feel comfortable doing a task, even as simple as the one you said, without installing those Windows updates first. And my father informed me, well, no, there has to be something else. Is there anything we can do right now? Heck, I'll pull my wallet out. He's like, I'm ready to buy a new computer right now. And I said, why don't we just get a Chromebook? My father and I have been using Google Chromebooks mostly for work-related stuff over the last, 5 or 6 months, basically. But while I was pretty happy with the operating system the way it was, there were a lot of, basically they handed us one of the run-of-the-mill, lowest common denominator, probably one of the poorest quality Dell's laptops I had ever received. It had an awful screen, half the buttons were broken, half the ports were broken, probably because they've been smashed by students and returned anyway. And the touchpad worked whenever it felt like it. But there was a lot of promise with it. Most of Google's, server software for it were fine, perfectly fine. And once I figured out how the interface worked, which was not as complex, certainly not as difficult as learning Android from scratch, and certainly not as complex as learning Windows from scratch, for that matter. There was a lot about the operating system itself that I really liked. And I thought to myself, well, if I could only get a better laptop, a more powerful laptop with this software on it, maybe you've got something. Here's a quick look at the X360's system specs. Some of those system specs you're going to want to take a pretty close look at, particularly the 8 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM, the fact that it has a fingerprint reader, the 14-inch screen with a touchscreen capabilities, but other things like the fact that it has integrated system graphics, or even things like its storage capacity with 64 gigabytes of eMMC storage, are really not that relevant when it comes to a Chromebook. And here's a closer look at it. This is the Hewlett-Packard Chromebook body. It does feel like aluminum, so it's got a pretty good construction here. It's fairly thin. I would say on par with modern MacBook or something along those lines. But unlike a MacBook Air, which has absolutely no ports to it, this actually has a bunch of ports. You can see you've got a USB-C charging port back there next to a volume control rocker switch, a privacy button for the webcam, a power indicator light, and power button on that side. And on this side over here, you can see most of the bells and whistles. On the far right, you can see a standard USB 3 port, which I mostly are going to be using for things like USB thumb drives or a wired mouse. A second USB-C port, headphone volume, headphone port. And that is a micro SD card slot. Turning it on is actually pretty easy. It actually has a power switch on the side, which will just turn it right on in like 2 seconds. The other option is if it's closed, you can just open it up. It's just got a beautiful screen on it. And that is a fully touchpad screen. That is a 2K Gorilla Glass screen at 1080p. Fully touch. Fully touch. A couple of other fun features about this. You got a pretty full keyboard, although there's no numpad here, but this is a very decent sized keyboard. But that's not even the coolest thing about it, actually. And here's a quicker look at the fingerprint reader on the Chromebook. Small thing I want to recognize about this. It works very similar to the Touch ID in an older iPhone, in which that you just simply put your finger on it and it will just automatically log you in. There are some limitations as to how it works. A couple of things: it only supports 3 fingers at most, although you are not limited as to which fingers you prefer. And an iPhone would use 5 fingers, or would be able to hold as many as 5 fingers in memory. Now, when I first heard about the concept of the Chromebook, it was a couple of years ago, and I had a person that I knew that had one. He loved it. But then when I started asking, well, what can you do with it? He really had no answers for me. The truth is that I was under the assumption that other than just run Chrome, there really wasn't much that you could actually do with the Chromebook. When I picked this up, boy, was I wrong. Now, I'm sure that when my friend had it back in the day, it was probably as I described it. Other than Chrome pre-installed on it, there really wasn't much else you could do with it. You couldn't install programs, which to me is what makes a computer useful. Without programs, what good is it? What good is it? If I can't run something, then what do I? Then what do I even need the computer for in the first place? I might as well get a tablet or something. I can at least run programs on a tablet. But recently, the Google Play Store is available for Chromebook, with programs and apps for the Chromebook. This is not that dissimilar to what Apple uses with the modern Macs. Pretty much because the Mac has no, external drives or anything, almost all Mac software has to be obtained through the Mac App Store, basically, which is, of course, run by Apple. This has access to the Google Play Store, which has a numerous amount of suites for applications, programs, and everything else. If you're already a person who owns copies of movies or music that you've already purchased through the Google Play Store or something like that, that'll all be available on here. And same thing with the books. Obviously, I don't have any purchases here, but if I did, I'd be able to watch them or read them. They can also be updated through the Google Play application as well. I just want to say something really quickly about the included touchpad with the computer itself. While it clearly does operate almost identically to all of the Chromebook touchpads that I've used up to this point, I'm just not much of a touchpad person. I never really liked them very much when it came to laptops in general. I do, on the other hand, love the touch screen itself. It's perfectly responsive, which kind of makes the pad underneath the keyboard kind of redundant and pointless. There might be some people out there that prefer to use a touchpad. I'm just not one of them. I know that a lot of you guys noticed that this particular model doesn't seem to have any video output, at least not in the form of an HDMI, but that's not really a big deal when it comes to a model like this. It's actually fully compatible with the Chromecast Ultra, and let's be honest, almost everybody's got a Chromecast Ultra lying around in their house. They mostly use it to connect, their tablet or their phone so that they can watch their application video streaming services on their television. This makes use of that. All you gotta do is just basically tap down here, tap that you want to cast, choose that you want to cast, tell it what to cast, and then boom, it's up on the screen. Look, Ma, no wires. Okay, you guys know what I know what you're thinking right now. You're asking yourself, but can it play games? Now, I mentioned earlier that this is not a model that uses a discrete graphics solution, and there's a couple of reasons for that. This uses Intel's integrated graphics boards, which in my experience have been nothing but terrible. Yet I can game on that system just fine. I've even played Cyberpunk 2077 on it with absolutely no problems, and it looking better than it does on the modern consoles. Stadia. This thing is fully compliant with the Stadia protocols. You can just simply go to stadia.com in the Chrome browser. No extra tools needed. No, maybe a mouse, maybe a key, maybe a wired mouse or whatever, or a controller. That's up to you if you want to use it or not. But yeah, this thing can play games just fine through Stadia. And because it uses Stadia so well, and Stadia runs really well on it, I've tested a couple of games. I'll even show you some samples in just a minute. Who needs discrete graphics? That saves me $200 to $300 right there. And no, your screen is not wrong. Do not adjust your set one bit. I am actually playing Cyberpunk 2077 on a Chromebook.
You're saving my life.
And no, also do not adjust your set. That game looks better and runs better than any version I've seen on the PS4 or Xbox One. I would put this on the level of a low mid-range PC. And this is running entirely through Stadia. Unlike a Windows machine, updating this computer really takes no time at all. All you've basically got to do is just simply run an update maybe once a day or something along those lines. And maybe there might be one. Most of the time there isn't going to be one. It updates just as fast as your Chrome browser does. Finally, charging it is pretty much a cinch. It uses a 45 watt power adapter that has a USB-C. And you can just simply plug it in like so. Like most Chromebooks I've seen, you actually will see an amber battery indicator light. It'll be amber when it's charging, and it'll be white when it's charged. Now, the larger unit, which has a discrete graphics solution, requires a 65 watt charging plug. Most of the accessory chargers that I've seen that Hewlett-Packard sells separately all use 65 watts. This shipped with a 45 watter. You'll probably get around 10 hours of battery life on this thing, maybe a little bit more if you keep it in standby mode. But battery life on this is actually quite good.